Today we will spend some time with Pien, a major artist of the Canadian art scene, born in Taipei, who immigrated to Canada at the age of 11 and who lives in Toronto. An artist represented by Pierre-François Ouellette Art Contemporain in Montreal and by Birch Contemporary in Toronto, whose works are in all major public collections of Canada, who exhibited extensively in artist-run centers and museums. Pien participated to many international biennales in Russia, Australia, Brazil, Montreal, and also as a very active international presence. And Ed, you have a history with our center and with friends. We will speak about trauma, ghosts, the spirits of the dead, your deep interest for elder stories, but also water. And we will start with Deep Water, a monumental but fragile, immersive paper installation that we presented in our ancient cultural center in 2001, an installation inviting the visitor to get lost in Taiwanese mythology's waters. I'm taking you back in times here, but it is an important aspect, I think, of your work to bring back the past, to bring out the monsters of the past.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Catherine. The past is important for everyone because it grounds us in the present and it gives us a line or sight into the future. So if we don't have a sense of the past, it's harder to really negotiate anything that's coming along, even, like I said, the present. So for me as an artist, I decided to go back to Taiwan where I was born to research why I do what I do, what compels me to move forward in my life. And I found that one thing that really interested me is that sense of ghostly, because I feel like everyone else, we have this sense of vulnerability. We all have fears, and I wanted to find out more about what is driving my fear. And Taiwan was a good start because it's a place full of ghosts and gods and demons. And so I actually went back in 1996 for 4 months researching all that to help them integrate it, to help them to be integrated into my work.
And we will go back to those ghosts because they will come in many of your works. But if we are at a more formal level with Deep Waters, what was very interesting is that you were inviting the visitor in a circular device or installation space, and some images were very close from the visitor and others were very far away, and we would have access to them through some kind of telescopic devices, if you remember, layers of paper showing, I don't know, hidden or forbidden images far away.
Well, first of all, I would just like to say that Deep Waters is inspired by a Taiwanese mythology where it is said that people who drown, they stay in the water and they can't release their soul until they pull someone else down. So all the people who have drowned were once taken by a ghost that replaces them. So hence, a lot of people are actually afraid of water. Many people don't want to learn to swim because they think that that's where the demons and the ghosts live. So also, because of that, if they were ever to encounter water, some of them will drown because they don't know how to negotiate water. So the work is about negotiation, it's about fears as well. So in terms of the work, I wanted to create a piece that's very mysterious. I wanted to allow the viewers to explore it so that they can't see the whole thing at once. I think mythologies are like this, mysteries are like this. You know, it takes time to unfold and it doesn't answer all the questions. So for a person to take enough courage to actually go inside the piece and then to look around and see other layers and layers of drawings and images, I think that's where I'm trying to, I would say, convey the sense of fear, vulnerability, mysteries, and just also curiosity and wonder.
Curiosity, wonder, but also, if I remember well, there was a sense of sensuality and sexuality also. And those types of figures, of course, come back years after years in your drawings. If I just mention series like They Have Her Surrounded, Night Creatures, Feeding Time, or at another moment, Ad Infinitum or Marie Magdalene, you know, those series of drawings, but many, many others, are also based on those very organic, visceral, and as I was saying, sexual and sensual figures. You seem to create a chaos with the line, drawing like if you were developing a chaos that was moving on the paper, and then the paper is some kind of a frame that you have to exceed, that you're always like in some kind of transgression of a confined space.
Well, the way I draw is really about just making marks to start, and from the marks I see images that I follow. So in a way, when I start a drawing, I never know what the final outcome will be. And so that's really quite lovely as a way to think about the body, because in a way I'm celebrating the many possibilities of bodies. I was inspired by a Chinese classics called the Mountains and Seas Classics. In it, there are these hybridized creatures. They are celebrated for their difference, but in our world, we actually don't like differences. So here in my monstrous world, my grotesque world, my world full of ghosts, I am celebrating this otherness. They have a place and a part to play within our psyche in the way we negotiate the world. So I use these to really suggest a sense of vulnerability, not only in the figures that I draw, but also in ourselves. Most people want to conform. They don't want to see oneself as being different. So when I'm working on these creatures that have 3 eyes or 4 arms, it's a celebration. But for some people, it may be seen as very grotesque, but it's a way for them to really think about how to turn their mind around so that all different varieties of expressions are celebrated.
But still, you have very strong and evoking titles like They Have Her Surrounded, her, we don't know who, with Mary Magdalene that we know very much in Christian culture. You have also some specific thematics. I don't know if rape was intended when you mentioned They Have Her Surrounded. I don't know, because when we look at this drawing, we don't know exactly what we are looking at, but this is a strong title.
Right. Yeah, you're being very perceptive. I never gone that far. Maybe my mind is just not so dark.
Yeah, or mine is.
Or I like to evoke a darkness. For me, it is about power relationships. And when you have a little girl surrounded by these creatures, obviously you will start to think about all the dangers that are potential within that situation. So it really is about negotiating, confronting power relationships, and figuring out how to overcome all these differences.
Okay, but what about Mary Magdalene then?
For me, it's loosely based on her in the sense that I wanted to have this female figure who has been martyred. Here she has hair that becomes hands. She's actually extending her hands, beseeching people, trying to calm them down, trying to offer herself to them. I find it a very poignant figure because she's surrounded by a crowd. We don't know what the crowd is going to do, but here she's pretty calm, but she does have tears coming down her face. Again, it's about spectacle, about this body that's impossible, and people don't like it because it's not like them. It doesn't resemble something that they're familiar with. Therefore, they think it's terrible and need to be gotten rid of. And
when I hear you talk, I think about the circus. There's some kind of circus in that. Well, specifically in that Mary Magdalene drawing, I think, because as you say, it's not only dark. There's a lot of energy there, but like dangerous energy because it's about vulnerability, but also getting out of conventional frames. If I go back to deep water, because I started with this, but it will probably follow that discussion until the end, and not only because water is central in your art. So you were talking about the residencies earlier on, but what is interesting also is the fact that the Paris residency led you to produce Drawing on Hell that you presented a few years after. So those grotesque figures, and then about the drawings we're talking about, or Drawing on Hell, or the ghost installation you presented at Oboro. So they all come from cultural and collective imaginaries, or from the unconscious also, apart from your own end, in addition of that. But they also come from representations of control. We talked about that, but also maybe torture, discipline, punishment. I know you also talk about those very difficult subjects, and you were referring to those very difficult subjects and realities, actually, in some of your work. So referring to imaginary monsters and real monstrous acts in reality, that happened in reality, is also, I think, crucial in your practice. Would you say this is, in a way, linked to your specific background?
Yes, definitely. It started with that because when I went back to Taiwan to research ghosts and demons, I was led to these beautiful hell scrolls. So within the hell scrolls, you see different punishments that are given out to people who have sinned when they were alive. What I found really fascinating is the fact that these hell scrolls reminded me of the hell depictions from Western iconography. So I started to think about how mythology, how they have come about. Surely they must have been fueled by real life situations. So in my work, I'm trying to always pair the real with the imaginary, because that's where, in a way, that space between the two is where I'm interested in. It's a combination of imagining, but at the same time really thinking about what we do as humans to each other and to the world. That makes it the theme of my work.
So water, I was saying from the beginning, is an essential element of your art, and not only because you use watercolor or the fluidity of ink, of course, and not only also because of the fluidity of your line that is specific to your art. So this is about the medium you're using and about the energy going through you. But water is also political for you.
So in the past, when I was younger, I used to camp a lot. And I started to reflect on the fact that many lakes in the 80s and in the late 70s, they were killed by acid rain. So that's where my interest in water came from, realizing that we as humans are actually doing something terrible to our planet, to the environment. So fast forward, Hydra is a invitation from the Blackwood Gallery. The curators are Christine Shaw and Chloe Catalan. And both of them were interested in the environment and how we negotiate and kind of reflect upon the state of our world. So the site that was chosen was in Mississauga. It's quite a large area, some kilometers in scale, and it had cement plants, heritage sites, orchards, farmers' fields, lubricant factories, everything that's kind of mixed in there, including a brick-based beach. So it's right by Lake Ontario. So different artists are asked to think about the environment. And because I've been working with water for some time, I wanted to create a piece that talks about excess. So in here, in this work, there are actually 2 swimming pools, above ground swimming pools, that are pumping water throughout these pipes. And the pipes go a long way, several kilometers, and they're contorted and I would say almost like tangled knots. I wanted them to have a sense of a drawing, a sense of a convolutedness. And they are also punctured with holes. So during the exhibition, the duration of the exhibition, the water that is pumped into these pipes and circulated back to the pool somehow dissipate because they are leaked out. So in this way, I'm also talking about wastage and also talking about oil pipes in our country and elsewhere where there's a constant circulation of natural resources, but there's a danger of them contaminating the soil. But in terms of the other piece, Corridor of Rain, I was invited by Gerald McMaster, and the Sydney Biennale that year was focusing on different issues as well. So they actually invited me to continue my contemplation of water. Just so happened I heard a very wonderful interview on CBC Radio with Meryl Ann S. Fair. She's an environmental lawyer. She champions Indigenous rights to access of clean water. So in Corridor of Rain, I actually took her entire book and translated it into these beautiful rope patterns that suggest simultaneously kind of polluted rain because they hang down from the ceiling and you have to walk through them. And also it actually tells in the entire text that she had written about this situation that are really horrendous for many indigenous communities. So I counted all the words and I measured each word. So if a word is, say, water, is 5 letters, it was 5 inches long. And the white is the blank of the space in the page. So I actually mapped out the entire, or translated the entire book onto ropes, but at the same time they are redacted because you don't see the actual text, but it references the text.
Also, what is interesting is the fluidity of the Hydra installation that, as you were saying, refers totally to your drawings. But at the same time, in the Corridor of Rain, the rigidity of the lines, it's only due to the gravity, you know. So they look very, very rigid, but they are, in fact, not at all because they are fluid as Hydra, that is, you know, invading horizontally the part. Would you say that both of them are talking about dispossession also in some way? More environmental issues on one side, not necessarily linked to indigenous rights, but on the other side, totally linked to indigenous rights?
I think when we talk about water in Canada, we cannot but speak about indigenous issues as well, because it's a land that settlers have taken over and started to exploit it as commodity. So when I deal with water, I really want to make reference to all the wrongs that have been done. Everyone is accountable because we're all part of it. And it's first to recognize that there is a wrong and then to see how we can move forward. And I feel Marilyn Esfer, who had written the book, has done a tremendous job in moving everything forward. She's a definite champion of indigenous rights to access to clean water.
So to go on with water, you did another one that is called Sea Change, a magnificent, large, paper-cut work, talking, I guess, about pollution also in the oceans, and also probably directly referring also to shamanic cultures or indigenous beliefs, past and present. So always deep waters in mind, I always come back to it. I see here how spirits and ghosts are present, but they are now floating in that dangerous net.
Definitely there's a net-like configuration throughout the whole work. It's meant to be both net and also patterns of water. And among the different images that are hidden or floating around this net, this wave, are dead fish. So all the fish that I got are actually ones that exist in Lake Ontario. And the photographs that I had taken are from the internet. They're all photographs of fish that people had caught. So they're holding them, so they're already dead, and their bellies are extended. So these are the fish that are floating or swimming in the water. And in it, there are also these hybridized figures. I figure that if we live long enough, that because we're polluting the air and the water and the land, that we will surely be changed somehow. So there's a sense of a foreboding that eventually we'll become a monstrous race because of all the pollutions, not only that we have brought to the animal world, the plant world, but also eventually it will come into our kingdom as well.
But are you in that piece also referring to that less physical and material dimension of pollution, but the way how pollution affects also the relationship between the visible and the invisible world, you know, like, because the spirits I was talking about, like, I had the impression that you are really referring to that, so that we just don't necessarily only have to speak about the physical damage, but the one that have an effect on beliefs, and this is as important probably.
Yes, definitely, because for the indigenous peoples, they truly believe that water is spirited. So with that in mind, it already aligns with my idea of the ghostly, the spirits that reside in the water. And what you said about micro and macro is important as well, because when we see a dead fish floating around, we think, okay, maybe the water is polluted. But in fact, for that fish to die, already thousands and billions of quadrillions of microbes have already perished because they're the most vulnerable. They are susceptible to minute changes not only in temperature, but also in chemical makeup of the waters that they live in. So it is about the seen and the unseen. And I mean, I'm not a scientist, but I really want to also not be I would say, like a gung-ho politician or political artist. I think the way to connect with people is to elicit something that's kind of beautiful and magical. At the same time, it has a statement. So it has this double-sided to it that makes people want to engage. So it's not something that's angry, shouting at you, but it's really inviting and seductive. I went to different places in the world, including Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Nanjing, where they had the Nanjing massacre, and also Chile. Under the Pinochet regime, many people were killed and tortured and just disappeared. So it was in Chile, in Santiago, that I found an exhibition space, a memorial space that was devoid of any photographs, any mementos to say, look, this has happened to our people. Instead, they stripped away everything, all the furniture, but they put on the walls these cautionary texts. And I found that exhibition to be really, really powerful. So in lifting the text and bringing it into a Canadian context, I feel there's something to be asked as a question. So the title, Future Perfect, means we know what we're doing wrong to our indigenous people, and why is it that we haven't done anything to change it all? So hence, to have the word like never again presupposes that it has already stopped, but it hasn't. So the question is, why hasn't it stopped?
You played also with those tense, present, future, past, in a very different context, actually, but dealing also with empathy and remembrance. And I'm referring now to the long project you're doing in Cuba. That actually I had the pleasure to see a few weeks ago at the AGO. You're dealing with aging, and you are dealing with aging by sharing lives, sharing your life with a specific community on an island, that is Cuba, an island state, and a poor community.
Nací el 11 de junio de 1957. Estoy casi en los 60. Gladys Esther Boada Rodríguez. Brilla 52 años. Yo me siento bien en mi edad. Ya ahorita con 60 años, pero me siento bien en mi edad, porque yo lo hago todo. Yo no le tengo miedo al trabajo, ni a las tareas, ni nada de eso. Ya tengo 47 años. Nunca he cuestionado la edad. Yo me cuestiono yo mismo. Mientras yo sea capaz de trabajar y seguir cumpliendo con mis deberes de revolucionaria y de cubana, yo no me miro la edad. Yo como yo misma, yo tengo ánimo, soy entusiasta. No quiero decirte que me siento jovencita, pero lo que sí me siento es capaz y satisfecha de todo lo que he hecho y todo lo que puedo hacer. Los años no me maltratan. Cumplí 50 ya. 50. 45 años ya. Estoy en los 60.
This is very strong and moving project because the end of the project will be the end because there's the end of those people or yours. We never know. We never know. So you are witnessing the elders' changing relation to time and to tenses, like in grammar tenses, which I think is absolutely amazing, and a form of disconnection of those aging people with our normal references.
Well, it began in 2014. Catherine Sicot, she's an independent curator. She invited me to go to Cuba in a small rural area near Havana to engage with a group of people. So based on different circumstances, I asked her if I can engage with a small group of elders, and together we would explore the idea of time and overtime. And the project would end, as you say, when everyone dies, or when I die, or when they lose interest. So definitely it is about bearing witness. Definitely it's about thinking of ways to facilitating these elders so that they can speak. They have tons and tons of experience and knowledge that they share, and they're very generous. So it is a project that looks at how time is considered for these people, especially when they say they're in their third stage. That's a tercera edad, which is a Spanish expression for old age, and also how over the course of these times, time has actually impacted on them, not just physically, but emotionally, maybe financially. So they're all different observations that I'm trying to make and convey in a way that speaks, I would say speaks about their situation. It's not to create a place where I want the viewers to feel sorry for them. I want them to, in fact, I feel they are empowered to speak and they have so much to share. So that was the most important for me. And so going back to the idea of older people, what's interesting for me is this sense of otherness. As I am always fascinated with this otherness, older people or aging bodies are considered this otherness. But that's one thing that's really interesting, because in our lifetime, if we were to live long enough, we become this other. We always say, well, look at those old people, not thinking that we will ever become old. But like I said, it really is a pleasure, despite of the fact that you may get more pain and aches and physical ailments and whatever. We're blessed to be able to experience life in all its different, I would say, facets. So this otherness becomes us. So in a way, to be able to listen to what they have to say, I would say prepares us better for what's coming.
We will again go back in time, and you were talking about here very specific people, because you are naming them. They have a name, you give their name, and we see those people, very specific people. But when I say we'll go back in time, we'll go back to ancient pine that you presented here in Paris, that you made for us. This is, in a way, another kind of island because this element is like a floating world. It's totally cut from reality. And we only see just in a position with what we were just discussing about the Cuba piece. It is here on the opposite side, it's generic or universal figures. There are only silhouettes. We don't have specific people at all. It seems that this work, that is very strange, that we see, we have the pleasure to see it each day, and the public entering the embassy or the cultural center, it's the first work they see, which was a very strong and conscious choice we were making by choosing this work. But that work seemed to say, let's start over. It's like if it was the start of a new civilization. People who are looking at that piece, they don't know what they are looking at. They see that spiky figure in metal cut and some couples, but we don't know what they are referring to. What is that ancient pine?
When I was researching trauma, I went to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And in Hiroshima, I saw these beautiful, beautiful pine trees. And to me, before I went to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I imagined the place still being haunted by the past, that the past ruins or whatever pollution, radioactivities are still lingering. But instead, I found beauty. I really found beauty, and I just felt, wow, these people who suffered so much during that time are so resilient. They still found beauty and they can start their lives. And so for me, this pine tree or these pine trees are a symbol of not only resilience, but also beauty and also of longevity, that we can last if we put our mind to it. So it's a piece where I wanted to play with simultaneously a tree and also a landscape. So some of the pines, some of the bush bunched up together areas, they are, in fact, mountains or hills. And like you said, these people are venturing into the world for the first time, and there's a vulnerability, there's a sense of fear or intimidation, but there's also a sense of wonder and curiosity they want to explore. For me, when I make a work, I really want to include a sense of a narrative. Even though it's really very open, ended, because I feel as people, we're driven by narratives from outside of us, from within us. You know, we need these stories to keep us motivated to keep going. So if we can see people who are similar, or in this case, the paper cut or the metal cut, that have similar creatures as us, and they're doing things that are kind of ambiguous, but because they're open enough, we can make interpretations. That's where the engagement may come from for the audience who see the work.
So now we will speak about that work, Rêverie. You gave a French name to that work that you did for the one of the tours du Haut built by the Atelier Jean Nouvel that were launched very spectacular towers in the 13th arrondissement of Paris. For me, it looks like a constellation. I cannot avoid thinking about that. I don't know if it's a configuration that makes sense for you if I say this.
It does make sense in the sense that there are different points of interest, and the eyes are made to flow through from one section to another section. And it's also backlit, which is something I've never tried before, but it seems to work really well in this case. It is a 15-meter wide piece by 5-meter high, so it's quite large. And it's a French word, but it's also an English word. So in English, it's just called reverie. So it's like dream. I want to create this moment where we feel we're at peace, we're relaxed, we can think about the past, the present, and the future. So when I made the submission, because I was invited to make this work, I still needed to give them a concept. And I wanted to suggest that Paris is Paris because it comprises all these different cultures from not just now, but from different times in our lifetime. So the minute Paris existed, surely it had already been inspired and influenced by other peoples and cultures. So hence, the figures that you see in this metal cut, they're all figures from different museums. They extend from a pharaoh to a wrestler from a Roman time. These are all very active figures that have their own stories within their own lifetime. And I wanted to really collapse the time. So some of the figures are actually confronting contemporary figures. I kind of imagine what would happen if Simone de Beauvoir met with, one of the ancient Egyptian kings. What would they say? What kind of conversation they would have?
I could not resist thinking about the fact that you worked with the idea of chinoiserie in some other works, and that as originating from Taiwan, that you were in some way inverting something, like creating like some kind of post-colonial chinoiserie in that rêverie, but maybe it doesn't have any sense.
No, it makes sense actually. It's true. It has reference chinoiserie as well, just because one of the initial ideas that I had was a Chinese shelf display system where you have all these beautiful layers with different objects, a bonsai tree, a rock, a sculpture, and I really want to think about how a collector, if they have these beautiful possessions, how they would lay them out, to how they would curate these shelves to allow these pieces to be, sharing a dialogue among each other. So that's where it actually began. And I am also playing with the idea of spatial illusions. I have Mont Blanc there, and also little rocks that the Japanese love to collect. They're like this big. So they're in the same space. And also these beautiful, I would say, ancient ruins. And then they're the ones that exist in different parks, like Bouchemont, Parc de Bouchemont. There's a beautiful temple there. So it is just being playful at the same time, and just being really doing a lot of research and to figure out what I would put there, because each one had to make a statement.
So we will go now towards a very unusual work that you did for us during the pandemic, and because the commission was to send 3 images that were that could be seen as a gift to the French public in a way, because it was a celebratory exhibition for the 50th anniversary of the Cultural Center, that it was being done during the lockdown, so that we had to change the project of our celebration. And you sent that the most horizontal triptych of all the works that we received. And again, water is there in a very, very powerful way. But I would like to ask what you had in mind when you sent that triptych.
Say, because I don't call myself a photographer, I wanted to make images that exceed, I would say, normal expectations of how photographs should look. So here I made them extremely panoramic. In a way, I'm also thinking about narratives of things unfolding over time. And I would say the most complex one is the Niagara Falls, because I have experience in Photoshop, in manipulating images. I was able to take what I had captured at Niagara Falls and redo the entire image so it looks like I'm actually floating on top of the water looking down at the falls, which is really hard to do, but I think I express that in the way I want it to take shape. Definitely, I would say that when you invited me to think about what we can share with a French audience, I really wanted to celebrate Canada. And in a way, I'm also playing with cliches. For many people, they think Canada is a very, very cold place. So I try to imagine what I can present that makes it even more cold and more, I would say, wintry. So here I selected 3 images. Even with Niagara Falls, it's shot in the wintertime so that you actually see ice forming on the side. So everything is very much about a time period, but it also just, I would say, a little bit with a humor, a playfulness to comment on a preconception of how other people see Canada.
It was great to have this triptych also because it was excessive. Ed, thank you so much for that discussion. It was wonderful to speak with you and also to be able to speak about your specific relation also with us and with France.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you so much for inviting me in the first place to present work when I was quite a younger artist, and I really value that experience.